Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast, brought to you by Women in ETFs. This is Kristine Delano, and I'm thrilled you've joined us. If you're pursuing excellence in your own career or intrigued by the hustle required to make it to the top, this podcast is for you. This season, I'm joined by Nicole Gates, a seasoned leader and incredible friend. We're going to agree, challenge each other, and maybe spill some secrets. So put aside that massive to-do list and let's get inspired. Nicole Gates, I have to say it has been so fun having you join me in this season. From your perspective in government contracting, from my experience in high finance, I am highly confident our listeners are getting something out of this. So thank you again for agreeing to do this with me.
I agree. It's been a ton of fun.
It has been a ton of fun. On this episode, we are talking about high accountability as being a key for high-performing teams. But also, there needs to be a culture of psychological safety and support. Nicole, you brought this episode to me this time, and this was your idea. Tell us why you were kind of passionate about talking about this balance.
As a leader, high accountability or high performing teams is absolutely where we want to be as an organization. And there's a natural tension between what we do to hold our teams accountable and to hit those performance marks with also supporting the people on the teams. It's also even, not only is there a tension, but they're almost counterintuitive, right? They're on opposite ends of the scale. And so how do you come to an outcome that you want while getting that balance right?
Tell me about a time in which we've seen this balance maybe show both sides of themselves.
Yeah, perfect example is during the pandemic. Everyone went remote, and companies and the government really started to show support for employees, flexible hours, childcare. Okay, if you had your kids sitting next to you, everybody went remote. If you could work remote, mental health support, and even I would say the power shifted to the labor side of the equation. And then today, it's almost the exact opposite, right? We're going back to work. There's going to be core hours. Mental health is becoming almost a dirtier word and less support there. And, hey, everyone needs to step up to the plate.
I think we're seeing that with some of the labor numbers that are coming in. People are holding out for jobs that, are still willing to have some of that flexibility and that compassion. As leaders, we have to be able to balance. These pendulum swings become so very difficult to find, maintain, and thrive in as employees, as leaders. There's just a tension that has to exist in a company in order to assure that these pendulum swings don't become so severe, like you just laid out, from pandemic times to now. We have to have leaders that are willing to sort of speak up and say, we need more accountability. We need more compassion. How do we do this well? And maybe one way of asking that is, what are some ineffective ways of doing it? So let's take the flip side of this. Like, when is it that this balance is definitely off?
Well, I'll give you an example that I think is probably one of the most ineffective that I've seen to date. There was a sales team in an organization that I was in that did not meet their numbers. And exactly. And the executive leadership team plus the leader of the sales team decided that a way to hold the team accountable was to fire everyone. Everyone. Down to the junior data person.
Right.
And make them reapply for their jobs. That's a way of holding them accountable, right?
Yeah, I see some downsides to this.
Yeah, so what they didn't think about was that sales folks, by nature of what they do, tend to be really, really connected in industry. They have an excellent network, and they basically put up that certain finger on their hand and walked out en masse. I think maybe 95% of the organization left.
Wow.
And the company did not meet their growth numbers for the next 2 years.
2 years.
Because they had to rebuild
You're
the
right.
entire sales team. And there was such a brand out there in industry, right? Because now everybody knows what the leadership team did.
Yes.
They don't want to be a part of that. Nobody's
Yeah.
good. Hey, is that a company that I really want to go work at? They know if I don't meet my numbers, they're not going to support us in any way, and they're going to be almost punitive.
Right.
But the intention was to hold the team accountable.
Right. And
So
now
a
you've
lot
got
of-
that brain trust out and working at all the competitors.
Against you.
Right. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, that
Against
is
you.
absolutely just a phenomenal example of accountability gone wrong. And you can see how you can really go down the wrong path in any decision, whether it's an accountability decision or something else, when you've got the sales manager and a couple of folks that are really upset about numbers, and they get in a room and they're like, oh, like, we have to solve this. You don't allow outside voices. You probably haven't circulated this widely as an idea of someone being like, hey, wait, those folks are super connected. They're all over LinkedIn. They're going to get jobs right away.
Where was the naysayer here,
Yes,
right? At
right.
that level of an organization, huge organization, very, very senior leaders that all signed off.
Yeah.
So then, I asked myself, why do we still use tactics like that as leaders?
Because I think they sometimes work. I think back on a time that I was in charge of advisor technology for a large firm, and we had made some incredible progress with upgrading sort of the user experience of our technology. Speaking of pendulums, the pendulum had sort of swung the other side, and investment was going other places in the company. And so my team, that for a while had just been hot, we had made so many great improvements. We were really looking at efficiency of our technology and all of that. You could sort of see the writing on the wall. We weren't going to be able to do some of the, the massive changes that we had done before. So when we got to annual time of forming and storming through our strategy and operating plan for that year, I took a look at what my team was coming up with, and I'm like, this is the most lackluster, oh my God, what happened to us? This is no longer creative. We're no longer using the data. We're not proposing different ways to get feedback from our advisors. What are we doing? And I was, in that moment, I had not a compassionate bone in my body. I was mad. I was like, this does not represent, and it should make no difference.
Were you the first person to notice that things had become lackluster?
It wasn't until that offsite where people were presenting their ideas that I recognized that we were not on track. And now that you asked that question, what I should have recognized was, in years before, people were in and out of my office all the time. They were like, just arguing about different ideas. They were bringing in different consultants to talk through it, and things had been relatively quiet leading up to that. Everyone was getting along really well. Everyone was super happy, like we were sort of riding high on the success that we had had. And it wasn't until I started to see things slapped on the wall that I was like, this is not what we've come to expect of ourselves. I just threw it down. I'm like, we're not leaving until we have got a plan to get back on track. I got a lot of pushback because it was, in some cases, it felt a lot like just wasted effort because the money wouldn't be there. It was, no one was planning to give us any more money. But we went through the operation anyway, and I forced people over the next couple of weeks to, get it in gear. I didn't have my happy face. I was sort of embarrassed because whether we were going to get money or not, I was going to have to present some of these ideas in front of my colleagues. And I knew that people would see it the same way I did. Now, what ended up happening in this case, fortuitously for all of our advisors, is that we had a change in leadership, and the person coming in was all about user experience. And had we not had the plan, had I had to have gone forward with what the team came up with, I could have probably found myself out of a job. So in that case, going from extremes, like going into accountability, actually saved all of us and helped us all be seen as being like, oh, forward thinking, we're there. What people didn't know was that, had someone asked 2 weeks before, we would have been in a lot of hurt with the kind of work that we did. I think looking back now, I could have handled things differently. I could have seen my part in the fact that I wasn't seeing the type of momentum going into that offsite that I should have, but I didn't take any responsibility. I kept the accountability right where I felt like it should have landed with my leads.
How did you keep accountability without blame, right? Because that's a tricky one too.
I don't know that blame is ever where I go. So I think in some ways that's part of maybe my makeup, is that I can get hot about things and I can get excited and passionate about things, but I'm always looking for a solution. I have a lot of things that I'd like to improve about myself, but blaming people isn't where I would never think to go to firing. I would never think of those types of disruptions because it was my team's fault. I do think that instead of blaming, what I should have done was seen it earlier. That might have had an impact in people's ability to see me as a highly performing leader.
You did take accountability for it, right?
Yes.
And held your team accountable. So you did both.
Yeah, we did both. I just didn't do it with type of compassion that I think I would be better at now. I would be quicker to sort of recognize my place in where we got to where we were.
Continuous improvement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how do we get it right? How do we get both the accountability and compassion? I mean, you shared a story about accountability gone wrong. I shared a story of accountability without compassion that still kind of ended up going right. But you got a story for us that shows us getting it right entirely?
Yeah. So I was leading a very large project, one of those multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects. And we had a very large demonstration with the client. And each team member had to give a presentation for their area of specialty. And one team really, really struggled. They knew their material. They just could not communicate it. They orally, written, standing up. It was all together, just very awkward. And the executive leadership team started to panic and wanted to replace them. So I brought in a presentation coach to work with the individuals in question, and we spent an entire week every day working with the coach. And at night, we would go out to dinner. Everybody was on travel, so we were all co-located in one location. At night, we all went out to dinner together, had, tacos and margaritas, and then got up the next morning and went at it again. And it just over and over and over until it was so smooth and delivered so flawlessly that when it came time for the demonstration, the customer actually said, "You guys get us. You know exactly what we mean. You know how to do it." And we used humor throughout such that the person delivering it was able to even make fun of himself when he had those little flubs. So I think doing those things where we were all going out to dinner together. We were getting to know each other. We were getting to know each other as human beings and feeling supportive to each other. Bringing in the pros, right? The coach, the professional coach, and giving support, tips, tools, tricks. Right now you're empowering through skills to make somebody better at what they do. So it was a little bit of emotional. It was a little bit of professional. And then it was positive reinforcement, but continual. Do it again, right? It's not good enough yet. Do it again. And then bringing in the ELT so that way they could say, do it again. And so you're holding people accountable. You have a set standard, but all of the emotional, professional structure that needs to happen to support them through that growth process.
So that team, did they know that the leadership wanted them changed out? Did they recognize their inaptitude in the beginning of being able to do this?
They did. And they actually told me that they would be very happy with that.
Right. Right. That's what I was wondering is sometimes we are worst cheerleaders, right? Like we see it in ourselves as well. And we're willing to believe sort of the naysayers. So what inspired you to want to give them that next chance? I mean, obviously you probably had a better team that probably could do it and, would get there faster and you wouldn't have to spend the money and all of that. So What made you invest in them?
Because they knew the material better than anybody. And the customer who was evaluating that particular section or segment came from that environment and came from that technology. So they were authentic in their delivery. They were authentic and believable. And that's why I think the customer was like, you get it, right? Instead of bringing in somebody who is very, very polished, who maybe did not know the material, they were not out in the field, they were not working this hands-on, it was much, much more effective.
Do you think it's always possible to wear both hats? Like in that case, you were both compassion and accountability. Are you always that amazing? Can you always wear both those hats?
No, nor is it always effective, right? And so sometimes within an organization, I think you see it happen naturally where maybe the CEO is the humanitarian and the team support and the rah-rah, and your finance person is you're overspent, you're over budget, you've gone past your milestones, you guys aren't getting anything right, or maybe it's an operations person. So sometimes I think that organizations do it organizationally, or sometimes people put on a hat. I think what makes a leader really effective is when they see and they evaluate what the team needs. Do they need more accountability or do they need more support? And then change out the hat accordingly.
So when you're thinking about creating high-performing teams, are you thinking in terms of folks that can help you keep accountable or people that can help you find more compassion for your teams? Is that a thought process that goes through when you're forming teams?
Absolutely. Because as a healthy organization, you need that tension as we started up front, right? You need to have the right amount of accountability and the right amount of support to get it done. If you can't wear both hats, although I should note that my nickname is the Velvet Hammer.
The Velvet Hammer.
So a little bit of velvet, a little bit of hammer. If you can't do both of those, and I would argue that none of us can do that all the time, identify those individuals in your organization that are really, really good at each one, and everybody knows it, right?
Right. I think there's times where we are expected to have both. I do think that recognizing where you land natively is important. So do you tend to be kind of compassionate, work with people, really want to be sort of liked and, really sort of love the sort of camaraderie of it, but understand accountability? Or are you a love to get the tasks done, highly accountable, just really goal centered and like people and want to do that? But, so which way are you tuned? I think that introspection of knowing where you are is so important because you need to stack your deck a bit. So if you are someone who really is about the team, really is about the compassion, you need to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with some accountability folks, because in times of, and we've talked about it, in episodes past, but in times of like discomfort and disruption, where there's a great deal of strain on your organization, you don't want to be a sheep that is really a wolf in sheep's clothing. You want to absolutely understand what is at your core, so that when you end up leaning back into what's comfortable, because we all do it, right? Mm-hmm. We all kind of come back to how we want to behave. And we need someone next to us to say, hey, that might not be right. Okay, I've got a funny little story. So I was at a friend's house this week, and we get together at like 8 p.m. at night because she's got 2 little ones. The kids go to bed already, and we get to hang out with our mocktail or our tail. And we had talked on this show about the fact that I was already feeling, a little bit of that mom guilt of like, I was harder on my first one, a little bit overconfident, or at least trying to show confidence with my oldest, and maybe a little bit more even handed with my younger one. And so I've been really thinking about that. And I know you pushed me on it, and, and I appreciate your perspective on that. I was learning to be a parent on her, but I walk in and she shares the story about her grade school daughter. They were going over like powers of 10 or something in math. Her daughter says to her, "Stop. I don't want to hear this right now." And her mom just went ahead and explained to her about the powers of 10 and the math that she wanted to explain to her. And her daughter at the end of it just looks right at her and says, "I told you that I did not want to hear this right now, that I needed some time and some space, and I needed you to stop talking." And
the story is sounding a little familiar.
I know. And I know. And so immediately my thought is, you tell her that you are the one in charge, that you are the boss, that she will listen when you are ready to speak. And of course, she's a little bit more compassionate with some more gentle parenting techniques, and actually, gets her daughter to listen and explains all that. But it's so funny that even in my moments where I'm saying like, I would be so much of a better parent to the, highly strung, high-willed child, I feel like I flow right back into who is the boss, and you will need to listen to the boss. So I think
strategic hire. I think what you just said is everybody needs to really think about where they land on the spectrum and hire strategically to balance them.
Yes.
Right.
Or take grandparent training. Yes. Not anywhere near that yet, but someday I will need to figure this out. But yes, exactly. So in that moment, having people around you that you have strategically hired to fulfill some of the things like understanding the motivations of your own team members that maybe you don't have necessarily the acuity for, or that if they're not holding themselves accountable, you need folks around them to do that. So Nicole, that's one piece of this. You asked me when I was sharing my story, did I start to see the signs that my team maybe wasn't performing at the level that I needed them to? What are some of the other ways that we see that we're either too high on accountability or too low on compassion?
Yeah, I think one of the early, I'll call it a symptom for lack of accountability, is when your team members start to miss deliverables. And organizations' compliance training isn't done on time. They miss a report that they were supposed to give you. And there's always a lot of reasons why they missed it, but they missed it, right? And on the other side of the equation is when you set very high expectations and you get nothing. No pushback, no response, no have you thought about this, because they've kind of checked out.
Right. You haven't created this safe environment.
Exactly.
You haven't created a space that people are willing to do that. So what do we do if we start to see that our balance is out of whack, that our accountability and compassion are just not in the balance that we need to have a high performing team?
I think you start with the little things, right? Start to ensure that there is somewhat of a consequence for missing deliverables, and making sure that the team knows that it's due when it's due, and make sure that we're being reasonable here and we're not going off the deep end. But now it takes us to the other side, which is creating that psychological safe space, right, where they feel trusted, where they feel like you're an authentic leader, and they know that you've got their back. And not only do you have their back, but other team members, their peers, have their back. And when you have a really high accountable team, then the peers are going to have each other's back. Oh, you can't do that tonight because your kid has a choir practice. I'll go take that dinner for you, or I'll go finish that report for you. Right now, things are starting to go. Reward them, celebrate successes, call them out in public, recognize them.
So you're in balance when accountability looks like compassion. Right?
That's right.
Oh, That's fantastic, Nicole. So I hear you have a call to action for us on this episode. When this episode airs, we will have a LinkedIn post with those questions, and we would love to hear back from you on it. So send us a comment in, and we will circle back and read them on air. And if you have a question for us on anything about compassion and accountability or any of the topics that we've done, you can also put it on that post, and we will make sure that we are responsive to everything we hear. Thank you, Nicole. I love this call to action. That's fantastic.
I look forward to reading the inputs.
And I really, again, enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
And thank you, our listeners, for spending your time with us. I hope this is not just information, but you let it be transformational in how you think about your career. I'm rooting for you. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help We Talk Careers get in front of more listeners looking to succeed, just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button, because there's going to be another brand new episode and you don't want to miss it. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you for listening.